Alright, so in this video we're going to be building a complete task list application using the mean stack. Now if you don't know what the mean stack is, it stands for MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node.js. Now there are packages and modules or frameworks that were created to really streamline a lot of this process and basically set you up with a boilerplate for a mean application. Alright, I do know those exist. Feel free to still tell me about them in the comments, but I'm not using one of those because you're not going to learn too much from that. All right, if you really want to be a good developer and actually know what you're doing and understand it, it's better to basically do it from scratch. Right, so learn it, understand what's going on, and then move on to those tools that can basically do all this stuff for you. All right, so before we begin, I just want to mention that this is from an Angular 2 project-based course. Well, it's not from it, but it is. It's based off it. So if you do like this, I would suggest checking that out, and I'll leave the link in the description. All right, so I have four tabs open here, and I just want to kind of go through what we'll be working with. So for MongoDB, we're going to use a service called MLab, which will give us a remote implementation of MongoDB. So you don't have to worry about installing it on your machine and getting that set up. It does have some really expensive plans, but it does have a free sandbox plan, which is what we'll use. All right, so we'll get that set up. Now the E in mean stands for Express, and Express is a framework that you can install and you can use to build web applications. It features routing, APIs to work with HTTP requests, and just a whole bunch of different stuff for building applications and running a server. All right, so we'll get that set up. Obviously, Angular is going to be used for the front end, for the client-side UI. We'll build a task list component, and we'll also build a service that'll interact with our Express server. All right, now we're going to be using something called MongoJS, which is an ORM that'll allow us to interact with our MongoDB database and do inserts and finds and stuff like that. All right, and then of course we need Node.js. If you don't have that installed, just go to nodejs.org and download and install that. All right, and that obviously that comes with NPM as well. Okay, I mean hopefully you guys know at least a little bit. You know what NPM is and stuff like that. If you don't, I would suggest maybe going back into some of maybe the Express crash course, things like that, some of the more beginner-based courses. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is create a project folder. So I'm going to go, let's see, where am I going to go? In my C drive, let's see, we'll go into Sandbox, and obviously you can create your application wherever you want. I'm going to create a folder, and we're just going to call this, we'll call it My Task List. All right, and as far as the functionality, it's going to be very basic. The idea is just to get you familiar with the technologies and how they all go together. All right, so let's open up a command line in that folder. I'm just going to use my standard Windows command prompt. And feel free to use whatever you'd like for this. And let's see, I want to make this font a little bigger. Alright, yeah, that should be good. I'm sure you guys can see that. Alright, so let's go into the folder I just created. Alright, and first thing we're going to do is pretty much set up Node and then set up Express. Alright, so we need to have a package.json file, which is basically a manifest. It has the application name, the version, all that stuff, and it also will contain all the dependencies that we need. Alright, so to create that, we can say npm init, and that should start to ask us some questions here. It's going to ask us the name. My task list is fine, so we're going to click enter. Version, that's good. Description, we'll just say simple task manager. Entry point, I'm going to call it server.js, and then just enter through the rest. Alright, and that should have created a package.json file. Alright, now I'm going to open up my editor, and I'm using Visual Studio Code. which is really nice. It's free if you want to check that out, or you can use whatever you'd like. Alright, so I'm going to open up that folder. And let's take a look at the package.json file. Basically just has all the stuff that we just answered. Alright, so now what we want to do is install all of our dependencies. Okay, so we can do that through our command line. So we'll say npm install, and we want express. We want body parser. We want to be able to accept data through a form and parse that and then submit it to the database. We're also going to use EJS as our template system, and MongoJS. Okay, MongoJS will allow us to interact with MongoDB, and that should be it. So let's do -- save, and that'll add these to our package.json file. Alright, so now if we look at package.json, you can see that we have our dependencies. Alright, so now we're going to create the server.js file. Okay, this will be our main backend server file. So we're going to first bring in what we need to. So we'll create a variable called express, and we'll set that to require express. Alright, and that's just going to bring express in from the node modules folder, which is right here. Alright, and we also want to bring in our path module. Now path is a system module, that's why we didn't have to install it separately. And that'll just help us work with file system paths and stuff like that. Hence the name path. Okay, we also want to bring in the body parser. Alright. And now what we're going to do, we're going to have two files in a folder called routes, and one will be for index, which will basically just be our index page, our home page, and then one will be tasks, which will be the API that we want to create so we can work with MongoDB. So we're going to create a variable called index and set that to require, and it's going to come from routes /index. Alright, and then I'm going to just copy that, and then this one here will be tasks. Alright, now let's create our main app variable, and we're going to set that to express. Alright, then we'll set up the view engine. Okay, first we'll let the system know what folder we want to use for our views. So we'll say app.set, and we're going to set views. Then we need the path. We're going to use the path module here. Say path.join, and then we're going to pass in a double underscore, dir name, and then views. Okay, so that's going to tell the system our views will be in the views folder. Now we need to specify the engine. So we'll say app.set view engine, and we're going to tell it that we want to use EJS. Alright, now we also want to be able to render files with an HTML extension. So we're going to say app.engine, app.engine, and then we'll pass in HTML, and then we're just going to require EJS, and we just want to do .render file. Alright, so that sets up the view engine. Now we're going to need a static folder, and that's where we're going to put all the Angular stuff. Alright, so we'll say set static folder, and for that we need to do app.use and say express.static, and then we're going to use the path.join here again, say dir name, and specify the name of the folder we want, and that'll be client. Okay, so all the Angular 2 stuff will go in the client folder. Next thing we'll do is the body parser middleware. So we'll say app.use, and this is just standard middleware. If you look at the body parser documentation, this is right from that. We want to be able to parse JSON. Alright, and we also want body parser.url encoded, and we're going to pass in here an object and say extended false. Okay, so that's the body parser middleware. Now what we're going to do is create our route. So app.use, and we want the slash, which is just basically the home page. We want that to be associated with the index route, okay, so or the index route file, which is up here. All right, and then for the tasks, the URL will be /API. Okay, and then we'll put in here tasks. Okay, so whenever we want to interact with the API, we'll use that /API. Now what we want to do is just basically listen so we can run our server. So app.listen. We want to put in the port we want, which I'm actually going to put a variable up here and put the port in that. So we'll set it to 3000. All right. Actually, no. Set it to 3000 is good. All right, and then port. We'll pass that in, and then this also takes a callback function, so we can do something after it connects. And all I want to do is just do a console log, and we'll just say server started on port, and then we'll just concatenate that port variable. Alright, so that should do it for our server. Let's save it, and if we go ahead and run node server, whoops, what's this? Cannot find module routes index. Oh, we need to create the routes folder and these files. I didn't even think of that. So let's create a folder, and we're going to call that routes, and it's going to have a file called index.js and also a file called tasks.js. Okay, let's start with the index, and this file is going to be pretty short. We're going to just bring in Express, and then we want to use the Express router, so we're going to say var router equals express.router. Alright, and then we want to set our route for the home page, so router.get, because it's going to accept a get request, and it's going to be just slash. Alright, and then that'll take a function, and these route callback functions will take a request, response, and next. And all we're going to do right now is say res.send, and we'll just say index or index page. Okay, then we just need to export this so that we can access it from other files, and we want to export the router. Alright, and then I'm just going to copy everything here, save it, and then we'll add that to tasks as well. And then for right now, I'm just going to change this to tasks or task API, and just change this right here to tasks. Alright, so we'll save that. Now we're going to get an error still because it's going to look for the views folder, and we haven't created that yet. So let's go ahead and create that. And inside views, we're just going to create a file called index.html. Alright, and I'll get to that in a second. I just want to make sure that this will run. So node server, you can see it says server started on port 3000. And if I go to localhost 3000, we get our index page. If I go to /API/tasks, we get that task API. All right, all we're doing right now is this res.send, which just sends this whatever we put in here to the browser. All right, now ultimately with the index, we want to display our route, our template. So what I'm going to do is change this to res.render, and then just pass in here index.html. All right, and then inside index.html, we'll just create some HTML tags. And actually, let's put a doc type. All right, and then in our HTML tags, we'll put a head. And let's put a title. Body. All right, so let's save that. And we're going to need to restart the server, because right now if I go, we're still going to get that index page. So let's Control C and then restart it. And now if we reload, we get our index.html file. Now this can be kind of a pain to have to keep reloading the server like this, so I would suggest using something called NodeMon, and you can install that globally so that you can run it from anywhere. So to do that, we can say npm install -g, make sure you use that to make it global, and then NodeMon. And that'll just monitor your server and update whenever you make any changes. Alright, so now instead of node server, we're going to just run NodeMon. Alright, and you'll see it's watching. So now if I were to, let's say, add an exclamation mark and save it, without reloading the server, you can see that it actually does update. Alright, so now that we have our Express server up and running, what we want to do is start to use MongoJS to interact with our database. Now I haven't created the database yet, so I'm going to go to my MLab and just log in. Alright, go ahead and create an account if you don't have one. And then we're going to say create new. And we're going to leave the Amazon Web Services as the default cloud provider. And then if we click on single node and then check the sandbox account, that's the free account. And then for the database name, I think it has to be unique. I'm just going to say my task list Brad. You can call it whatever you'd like. Okay, so that should turn to a check. There we go. So that means it's set up. Now if we click on that, you should see a page like this, and what you want to do first is add a user. Okay, so if we go to users and we click add database user, I'm just gonna put my name in for the username and password, and then create. Okay, so now you can see we have a user. And then if we go to collections, I'm gonna click add collection, and we're gonna create a collection called tasks. Alright, and if we click on tasks, we can now add a document. We can add data from here. So let's go ahead and add a simple task. It'll have a title. Hope you guys can see that. Okay, so we'll say walk the dog. Okay, so it's going to just have a title, and it's also going to have is done. Okay, we're going to call it is done, and that's going to be set to false. Alright, so if we go create and go back, let's see, why am I getting an error? Oh, I forgot the comma. Alright, so now you'll see that we have the title, we have the is done, and it also gives us this underscore ID, which is equal to a unique object ID, so we don't have to worry about that. Alright, now let's create a couple more. Okay, title, and we'll just say go food shopping. Is done, false. Okay, so that got added. Let's add one more. Title. Whoops. We'll say go out to dinner. Is done, is false. Alright, so now we have a couple tasks to work with. So let's go back to our application, and now we're going to go into routes tasks.js. This is the main API that we'll be creating. So we want to bring in MongoJS. So we'll say var MongoJS and require okay, then we want to create a database object. We're going to set that to MongoJS, and then here's where we want to pass in our database information. So if we go back to MLab and go to back to our database landing page here, and you can see we have a way to connect to the Mongo shell and a way to connect using a driver. So we want this one with the driver, and yours will be different. So just grab that, paste that in there, and then we need to replace the DB user here with the username you created as well as the password. Alright, and then at the end here we're going to add another parameter, and this is an array of the collections you want to use. Okay, and the only collection we have that we want to use is tasks. Alright, and now we should be able to work with this DB variable. So instead of this res.send, let's get that out of there, and we'll say db.tasks.find. Alright, now inside find we're going to put a function, and that'll take an error and docs, or actually let's call it tasks. It's more descriptive, and we'll check for an error. So if there is in fact an error, we're just going to do res.send, sorry about that, and then we'll send the error. If there's not, then we're just going to return the JSON content. So we're going to say res.json and then just pass in the tasks. Alright, so let's save that, and hopefully this works. Let's go ahead and go to /API/tasks, and there they are. So we're returning the JSON content for those tasks that we created. Alright, so that takes care of that. Now we also want to be able to get a single task. Alright, let me just add a comment here. This will get all tasks. We also want to get single tasks. Why is it doing that? Alright, so what I'm going to do is just copy this whole thing, and we're going to say router.get. This time we're going to say task/:ID, which is basically a parameter, or just kind of a placeholder, because the ID is going to be dynamic. It's going to be different every time. Alright, and then we're going to say db.tasks, and then we can use this find1, and then before the function we'll have a parameter, and that's going to be basically the condition. So we want to say where _ID is equal to the ID that's passed. Now since it's an object ID that's stored in the database, we have to run it through this MongoJS dot object ID, and then pass in the ID that's passed in the URL. And to get that, we need to use request.params.id. All right, and then we're just going to change this tasks to singular task and change it right here as well. All right, and that should get us a single task. So let's save it. And then what we'll do is grab, let's say, the go out to dinner ID. And in the URL, we'll say API/task/ and then paste in that ID. And you can see it's going to return just that one task. All right, so far so good. Now we want to be able to save tasks as well. All right, so for that, we're going to need to do a post request, or handle a post request. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll say router.post, okay, instead of get, and the URL will be /task. All right, then do a function. It's going to take the same thing, request response next. And we're going to get the task from a form. So we'll create a variable called task, and we'll set that to request.body. Okay, that's how we can get it from the form. And then we're going to do just a very simple validation. We'll say if not task.title or task.is done, and then we're just going to concatenate just a blank string there. All right, and then we're going to just send a 400 status. So it's going to be an error. So res.status 400. All right, and then we'll also just send some JSON, which will be an object, and it'll just have an error, and we'll just say bad data. All right, so that's if there's an error, and then we're going to do an else right here. And then that means that everything went okay with the form, so now we can proceed to do db.tasks.save. All right, and inside here we'll pass in the task and then our function. Okay, that function will take in an error. Oops. And task. And we'll check for the error. We'll do the same thing we did up here. Just grab that and paste that in. All right. Now, we could test this using some kind of program that will let us make HTTP requests, so curl or something like that. But I'm just going to hold off for now, and we'll test it when we get to the Angular application. All right, so that's to save a task. Now to delete a task, let's do that. And I'm just going to copy. I'm going to copy this because it's kind of similar. Alright, so delete task, let's paste that in. This is going to be router.delete. Now it's going to have this same URL. Now even though we have task ID here, we can still have it here because it's a different type of request. It's a delete request. That's a get request. Alright, and then we're going to have db.tasks.remove. And same thing, we're going to pass in the ID. And the rest should be the same, I believe. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, so that's a delete task. And finally, we'll do the update. Alright, so for this, let's grab, I'll just copy this. Alright, so this here is going to be a put request. So put pertains to when you're updating data that's already on the server. And then what we'll do down here is get the information from the form. So var task is going to be equal to request.body. We're also going to create a variable called upd task, which will represent the updated task, which I'll set to just an empty object for now. And then we're just going to do some, I guess, validation. We're going to say if task dot is done, then we're going to set that update task dot is done, set that to task dot is done. All right, and then same with the title. Copy that. So task dot title, and then down here we'll set this title to task dot title. All right, and then let's check for the actual object. So we're going to say if not updated task, then we're going to send a response, a status of 400, and then we'll just send that res.json, and we'll send an error, and we'll just say bad data. Alright, so let's put an else here. Okay, this is where we'll do our query. I'm just going to copy what we have right here, or cut what we have there, and paste it inside the else. Alright, and then we're going to change remove to update. Okay, so update's going to take in the condition, which we're going to match the ID, and then after that we're going to put a parameter. We're going to put our updated task object, and then another one which will just be an empty object, and then of course our function. Alright, and then all of this down here can stay the same. Check for the error, and then just spit out the task in JSON format. So let's save that. Alright, so again, we're not going to test this, the delete and the update right now. We'll do that when we get to Angular. Alright, so everything should still work. We shouldn't get any errors or anything like that. Good. So I think our back end is complete. We now have an HTTP. We now have a RESTful API. So now it's time to work on the front end, on the Angular part of the application. So we need to create our client folder. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to basically just follow along with the documentation. If we go to angular.io and then get started, and we scroll down to this area here, there's 4 main config files we need to create. Okay, so first we have package.json, so we're going to just copy that code, and inside client, let's create a file called package.json, and we're just going to paste that in. I'm going to change the name here to my task list, and that's all we're going to do. The rest is just all of its Angular and all of its dependencies. Alright, so let's save that. Next one is tsconfig.json, which is the TypeScript config file. Let's create that inside client. Okay, paste that in. Basically telling the system we want to compile to ES5, and we want to use the CommonJS modules. Okay, this one is typings.json. This is just the typings that Angular needs. Paste that, save it, and then system.js config. We're going to copy that, and then we're going to create system.js.config.js, and then just paste that in. Alright, so we can close those up. And now what we need to do is we need to run npm install, but from the client folder. Alright, so I'm actually going to open up another command line. Alright, and we're going to navigate to that folder. Okay, and then we want to go to client and then run npm install. Alright, so now what we want to do is create inside the client, create our app folder. And now we're just building an Angular 2 app. Okay, there's really no difference whether it's a mean app or not. Okay, so let's create inside app. If we go to the documentation here, we need to create a file called app.module.ts. Okay, so inside the app folder, we're going to create that file, app.module.ts. And we'll just grab what's here. Alright, and basically we're just implementing ng module, which basically helps organize our code. Alright, this file here, whenever we create a component, we have to import it in here and then add it to ng module. Okay, so the next file we want is app.component.ts. So let's create that. Every Angular 2 application has a core app component. So let's grab that code. And this is just standard component code. We import the component package, and then we add this component decorator with a selector. In this case is my app, and then a template, which in this case is just a string with an h1 and then a class. Alright, so save that, and then we have to import that into app module TS. Okay, so we'll say import app component from app.component. Okay, now we have to add this. We have to actually create two new arrays here. We're going to have declarations and also Bootstrap. Alright, and you can see that if we go down here. Okay, declarations and Bootstrap. We have to add app component to both of these. Okay, and then the next one we want to create is main.ts. So let's create that. Main.ts, paste that in, and this is basically just bootstrapping our core app component. So save that. Now remember, we're using TypeScript with Angular 2, so these need to be compiled into regular JavaScript in order to run the application. So what we'll do is inside of the command line where we're in the client folder, I'm just going to run npm start, and that should compile all of our TS. You can see now there's a bunch of JavaScript files. Alright, and then if we go to localhost 3000, we get, oh, we shouldn't have that. Oh, we didn't we didn't add the HTML code. Alright, so let's go back to our documentation here, and there's an HTML file here that we need to grab. This is what loads everything. And then we'll go into our HTML file, which is in the views folder, and replace that. Let's change the title. Okay, and everything else should be good. You can see that the custom tag here, my app, that actually goes along with the selector of app component TS, which is right here, my app. Alright, so let's make sure we save index.html. And let's go and reload. And there we go. So the Angular app is now running. So if we open up the console, now I'm getting an error because there's no style CSS file, and you can see it's looking for one here. It's included. So let's just create that. We'll create that inside the client folder. So new file, styles.css, and then that error should go away. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and just close everything else out here. So we want to use Bootstrap for our UI, and there's a few ways we could set that up. I'm going to use Bower, which is a front-end package manager, much like NPM is for Node and for the backend, for the server. So let's go ahead and go into our command line. The one that's in the app root, not in the client. And I'm going to stop that. And if you don't have Bower installed, you just want to run npm install -g Bower. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to run it, but you run that and it'll get installed globally. And then you can use it to install packages. Now, when we use Bower and we install a package like Bootstrap, I want it to go in a folder called Bower Components inside the client folder. So to make it do that, inside the root, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it .bowerrc. Alright, and then we just need to put in an object here, and we're going to say directory, and we want the directory to be dash client slash Bower components. Whoops. Alright, actually we don't need that first slash. So let's go ahead and save that. And then we'll go back and we'll say Bower install Bootstrap. And we'll add -- save. Alright, and it'll also install jQuery because jQuery is actually a dependency for the Bootstrap JavaScript. And now you'll see in client we now have a Bower components folder with Bootstrap and jQuery. So now we have to include it in the HTML, so views index HTML, and we'll go right up here, put in our link tag. Okay, and then the path is going to be Bower components / bootstrap / dist / css / bootstrap.css. Alright, let's save that. And then I'm going to run, let's run node server. Reload, and now you can see the fonts change, so Bootstrap is now being read. So we're going to work on the UI. Alright, and in our Angular application we're going to have a component called tasks. So in the app folder we're going to create a folder called components. Spell that right? Components, yeah. And inside there we're going to have another folder called tasks. Now in this application we're only going to have the one task component, but it's good to have it in a separate folder just in case you want to add more later on. So inside tasks, let's create a file called tasks.component.ts, and also a file called tasks.component.html. That'll be the template. Alright, so let's go to the TS file, and we're actually going to copy what we have in app component TS. Okay, and then we'll paste it in there, and then we'll change the selector to tasks, and change template to template URL, and then change that to app. I'm sorry, not app. Tasks.component.html. Alright, and then we'll change the class to tasks component. So we'll save that. Inside task component HTML, for now we're just going to put in the word tasks. Alright, now in order to use this we have to import it into app.module.ts. So let's go ahead and do that. God, I'm having a hard time spelling component today. So import task component from components / tasks dot component, and then we're going to add it to the declarations and save it. Alright, and we should be able to use it, so let's go into our app component TS file, and we'll go ahead and replace this with tasks. Save that. Let's see. 404 not found. Oh, you know what we can do here is inside the task component TS, at the top here, we're going to add module ID and then module.id and save. Alright, so now it works. In order to use the relative path like this, you have to add that at the top here, or just somewhere within the decorator. Okay, so you can see our task component is now showing. Now for the app component TS, I want to also use a separate file for the template. So we'll say template URL, and we'll grab that, change it to app.component.html, and also add the module ID. Save that, and then let's create that file. And paste in tasks, and we should get the same thing. Alright. And let's actually put this in a container. Say container. Alright, and then let's put an H1 right here, and we'll just say my task list. And then we'll put an HR tag. Alright. So now what we want to do is go to our task component HTML and start to build that UI. Okay, so first thing we're going to have is a form. And let's see, in this form, let's give it a class of well. And then we'll put it a div with the class of form group. These are just Bootstrap classes. Alright, and then we'll put an input, give it a type of text, and a class of form control, and let's give it a placeholder, and we'll just say add task. Alright, and then below that we'll have a div with the class of task list, Alright, now this is going to have 3 columns. It'll have a checkbox, then the task title, and then the delete button. Alright, so for now we're just going to put some static stuff in here, and then we'll go on to create the service and all that. Alright, so let's create a class here, or a div, with the class of callMD1. This will be the column for the checkbox, because we want to be able to check them off and make them and mark off is done. So in here, let's say input type equals checkbox. Okay, then we'll have a class called callMD. Let's do 7. And then this will be the title. So for now, I'll just say some task. Okay, and then we're going to have callMD 4. Okay, this will have a delete button. Let's make it an input. We'll give it a type of button, a value of delete, and a class of btn danger. Alright, so let's take a look at that. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we have the basic UI, we need to create our service to interact with our API that we created. Alright, when you're using Angular, a service is used to do stuff like communicate with an API, because you want that available across all your components. If we had multiple components, we don't want to write the same code in each one. We want to create a service that'll send it across them all. Alright, so in the app folder, we're going to create another folder called services. And in there, let's create a file, and we'll call this task.service.ts. And we're going to import a couple things here. Okay, so we want a package called injectable, because we want to be able to inject this service as a dependency. Okay, and that's going to be from Angular/core. We're also going to use the HTTP module to make requests to our API. So we want to include HTTP as well as headers, which will allow us to manipulate the headers. And those are going to be from Angular/HTTP. Alright, we're also going to be using observables. We want to get our requests and then send the data as an observable. So we want to use the map operator. So we're going to say import RxJS, which is reactive extensions for JavaScript, /add /operator /map. Alright, and then to use the injectable, we need to add the decorator, and then we're going to create our class. And it's going to be called task service. Alright, and then let's create a constructor. And since we're using the HTTP module, we have to inject that into the constructor. So say private HTTP, set that to HTTP. Alright, and then let's just do a console.log, and we'll say task service initialized, and save it. Now, to be able to use this service, we're going to go into we're going to go into our app component TS, and we're going to import it. So let's say import task service from services/task.service. And then we have to add that as a provider, so we're going to go down here and say providers. Inside brackets, we'll just add task service. Alright, so we'll save that. Now, since we're using the HTTP module, we have to actually bring that into app.module.ts. So this is kind of like a meeting file for all the different components you have in all the modules. So import HTTP module, and that's going to be from Angular/HTTP, and then we're going to add that to the imports array right here, like that. Alright, now if we reload the application, we're still not seeing that the service is initialized. That's because we have to inject it, and we're going to inject it into our task component. Alright, so we need to import that here as well. Okay, so we're going to go // services task.service. Okay, and then we're going to add a constructor, and we need to inject it here. So we'll say private task service, set it to task service. Alright, so if we save that, reload, now you can see that it's been initialized. Okay, so we can now use it. Now we want to fetch the tasks from our API. So let's go back into the service, and we're going to create a function here called getTasks. And it's going to be really simple. We're going to return, and then we're going to use this.http.get. Okay, we want to make a GET request to our API, which is at http localhost port 3000 /API/tasks. Alright, and we want to return it as an observable, and we're going to just add the map operator here, and then say the response we want to change to res.json. Okay, we want to return it as JSON. So we'll save that, go back into our task component, and inside the constructor we're going to say this dot task service dot get tasks, which is what we just created, and since this is an observable we need to subscribe to it. Alright, and then in here we'll say tasks, and for now let's just console.log tasks. Alright, let's see what that gives us. Alright, so now down here you can see we're getting these objects, and if we look at them, they're the tasks from our API. Alright, so we're successfully getting them. Now what we want to do is add them as a property in our component. So let's add up here, we'll say tasks, and I'm going to set that to the type of task, which isn't created yet. That's why you see the red line. Now you could just set this to whatever, just an array, but I like to create kind of a model for our properties. So what we'll do is let's create a file, not in the app folder, outside of the app folder, but it's still in the client folder, called task.ts. Alright, and then all we're going to do is export a class called task, which will have a title, which will be a string, and also is done, which will be a boolean. Alright, and then we're just going to import that into our task component. Okay, that'll be .. let's see, 3 times, and then task. Alright, so now you can see that red line's gone. Now what we want to do is, instead of console logging, we're going to set this .tasks equal to that task that's coming in from the observable, and then we'll have access to them inside of our HTML file. Alright, so we'll go back in there, and since this is an array of objects, we're going to use ng4 to loop through them. So let's go right here, and we'll say div *ng4, and we'll say let tasks, or let task of tasks, and we'll put the ending div down here, and now we should have access to each task. So right here we'll put in our double curly brace and say task.title, and save. Alright, so now we're pulling them into our list. So now that we're displaying our tasks, we want to be able to add to them. Alright, so we have our form here. So what we'll do is, in the form tag, we want a submit event. So we're going to say submit equals, and it's going to equal a function called add task, and we're also going to pass along the event object. Alright, now for the title here, we're going to set, this is going to be its own property, so we're going to set an ng model, and we're going to set it to title, and then we also need a name attribute set to the same thing, title. Alright, now if I save that, I think we're going to get an error if I reload. Okay, and we're getting an error because in the latest version of Angular 2, you need to include the forms module if you're going to use ng model. So we need to go back to app.module.ts, and just go ahead and import that. Okay, that'll be from Angular/forms, and then we just need to include it right here. Okay, save that, and now that error is gone. Alright, so we added the ng model. Now let's go back to our component, and let's see, we want to add right here title and set that to string. And then let's go down and create our add task, which takes in an event. And so let's say event dot prevent default, just so it doesn't actually submit. And let's do a console log, and we'll say this dot title. Okay, so now if we go back and reload, and I type in something and I submit, click enter, you see we're getting something. So we know that we're submitting the form, we know that we can grab the title. Now what we want to do is create a new object for our task that we want to submit. So we'll call this new task, set it to an object with a title of this.title, which is whatever we type in, and then also is done, which we want to set to false initially. Alright, and then what we want to do is we need to have a service function that's going to submit it to the database. Okay, I mean, I could do say this.tasks.push and then pass in the new task, and you'll see if I go and type something in and submit it, it's going to show up here, but if I reload, it's gone because it's not persisting to the database or to the API. So we have to do that. So let's do this dot task service dot add task, and I know we haven't created that yet, but we will, and then pass in new task. Okay, and it's going to be an observable, so we're going to do dot subscribe, and then in here we'll do task, and then we can do our this dot task dot push and pass in that new task, or not the new task, but the task we get back. And then we'll simply clear the form by saying this dot title equals nothing. Alright, so we'll save that. Let's go to our service, and then we're going to say add task, and that's going to take in that new task object. Okay, now we're using the HTTP module, and we need to set our headers, so we're going to say var headers equals new headers, and that should be an uppercase H right here. Alright, and then we'll say headers dot append, and we're going to pass in here content type. Okay, content type we want to be application/JSON. Alright, and then we're going to return this dot HTTP dot post. Okay, it's a post request, and it's going to go to HTTP localhost 3000 /task. Alright, now the next parameter is going to be that new task, but we want to send it as a string, so we're going to wrap it in JSON.stringify. Alright, and then the next parameter will be an object with the headers. Okay, we want to map it, so .map res to res.json. And that should do it. Save it. Okay, so now let's just say my new task and enter, and we're getting an error here. Oh, it should go to /API/task. Huh. Localhost 3000 API/task. Let's see, what am I doing wrong here? It might not even be on this side. Yeah, let's just check out the API. So if we go to routes tasks, okay, we have router.post going to task. So we're getting a 400. So if not task title. Alright, you know what? Let's see what it is we're actually sending. So in our service, let's do a console.log, and I'm not going to cut this out just so you guys can kind of follow along. Alright, so console log it. Alright, so we're getting title test is done false. So that's correct. That's what we want to send. Headers. Oh, there should be an exclamation mark right here. Let's try that. No, it's still not working. Alright guys, I'm going to pause the video for a second and I'll be right back. Alright guys, I just restarted the server and it worked. So I don't know if you guys are having that problem, just try to restart the server and this is correct. Okay, and make sure you have that exclamation mark there. Alright, so we're going to move on now that we can add tasks, and I'll just add another one just to prove it. We'll say pick up kids at school. Okay, so we can add it, and I'm just going to add a little CSS style just to, I don't like how these buttons are so close. Actually, not CSS, let's just add in the HTML. We'll just put a line break right there, or two. There we go. Okay, so we can read, we can add to it. Now we want to be able to delete these as well. So let's do that. We have the delete button right here. So what we want to do is add a click event. So parentheses, click. Okay, we're going to set this to delete task. And all we need is the ID, so we'll pass in task._ID. Alright, we'll save that. And then let's go into our component TS. Say delete task. It's going to take in an ID. Oops, not a TD, an ID. Okay, and then we're going to create a variable called tasks and set it to the current tasks. Alright, and then we're going to call a service function, so task service dot delete task, which we will create, and then that's going to take in the ID, and it's an observable, so we're going to subscribe, and inside subscribe we'll say data. Alright, and then we're going to say if data dot n is equal to 1. And what we want to do is loop through. We want to loop through the task and then find the one that matches that ID and then splice it out of the array. Alright, so we'll do a for loop. So for, we'll say var I is equal to 0. And then as long as I is less than tasks dot length, okay, we want I++ to increment by 1. And then let's do an if statement to check the IDs. So we'll say if tasks I, which is the current iteration, dot underscore ID is equal to the ID that's passed in, then we know that's the one to delete. So we'll say tasks dot splice and pass in the iteration variable and then 1. Alright, so let's save that, and then we need to create that function in the service. Delete tasks, okay, which takes in an ID. And that should actually be singular, delete task. Okay, we're going to return this dot HTTP, and this is going to be a delete request. So we're going to say delete, and let's say HTTP. Actually, you know what? We're using this localhost 3000, and we shouldn't have to. Okay, because we're on the same domain, so let's get rid of that. We'll just say /API/task/ and then we just want to concatenate here the ID. Alright, and then we'll just map. Okay, we'll map that back, res.json. Okay, let's try it out. So test task, let's say we want to get rid of that, it goes away, reload, and it stays gone. Alright, so the last thing I want to do here is I want to be able to mark these off as done. Right now if I check them and I reload, it goes away. Alright, so it's useless. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to our HTML and go inside of where the input for the checkbox. We're going to put some brackets and say checked. I'm going to say checked if task.isDone. Alright, and then this is also going to have a click event. When it's clicked, it's going to call a function called update status. And then we're just going to pass in the task. Alright, so let's save that, go back to our component TS file, and we want to create this update status function. Okay, that's going to take in the task. And let's create a variable. We'll call this underscore task. So we're basically just creating a new object to update with. So we'll set the underscore ID to task._ID. We'll set the title task.title and is done to exclamation task.isDone. Alright, and then after that we're going to call a service function, task service.update status, pass in the underscore task object and subscribe. Okay, and then in here we'll say data, and we're going to set task.isDone equal to exclamation task.isDone. Alright, and that should do it for us. So let's save it, and then we need to create that service function. Okay, pass in task. And I'm going to copy what we have right here with our headers and all this. Okay, let's get rid of that console log. Paste that in. So this is going to stay the same, and then we're going to say http dot put, and that's going to go to API task and then the ID. So we're going to just concatenate on here task dot underscore ID. Alright, and then this new task, let's change that to just task, which is what's being passed in up here. And then the rest of the stuff can stay the same. Alright, so let's save that. Hopefully this works. So let's say we went out to dinner. Let's check that off, reload, and it stays checked. And you'll also notice if we go to MLab and we look at tasks and go out to dinner, you'll see that is done is now set to true. Alright, if I uncheck it, reload, now you'll see it's not set to false, but it's gone, which is basically the same thing. If I were to set it again, it'll go back to true. Okay, so that's it. Our task list application is done. I apologize if this was too long or if any of it was confusing. I know there was a lot to it, but like I said, if you know how to do it from scratch, you have a much better handle on it than if you just use some pre-made mean.js or something like that. Alright, so that's it. And again, if you guys like this, check out the course that's in the description, and please subscribe, leave a like, whatever you can do is fine, and thanks for watching.